Resident Evil 4 vs Silent Hill 2. Both of these games are considered their best on their own respective horror franchise, yet they have very different approaches to horror. Today, I'll be looking at each game individually to see what makes them such a great games, their flaws, how they use the same mechanic in different ways, and finally, which one is the better game. Let's start off with Silent Hill 2. We start with a man while staring at himself while thinking of a letter he received. Our main character James receives a letter from his deceased wife that tells him to come and meet her at the town they vacationed in, Silent Hill. You can tell that this man knows what he is doing is completely illogical, looking for his deceased wife. But even then, he wants to believe that she is actually waiting for him, wanting to find answers as to where this letter came from, and if his wife is somehow still alive, he sets off. But once he gets there, he notices that it's a ghost town, with strange events and just as strange people. Once you have control, you start inside a public bathroom, and it seems about right for a public bathroom. The first thing you notice is this game has the infamous tank controls. Tank controls is a rather old control scheme and not something a lot of games use anymore because of how stiff the movement is. There are two different versions, 2D and 3D tank controls. The 3D controls is when you press forward and it will cause James to move forward from his perspective, while 2D controls is forward based on the camera angle. I prefer the 2D since I'm used to the camera being my reference than the character in the game. It will cause you to trip up from time to time since the game sometimes changes the camera angles, making forward be a whole different direction. You will have time to get used to the controls without any enemy encounters until you pick up the radio. You will see that the combat controls in this game are clunky. To be able to hit your enemies, you have to go into a combat stance and move around slowly. If you have a weapon equipped, you can whack them with it. At first, they're a bit difficult since you have to get used to it, but once you get the weapons and enemy patterns down, they're pretty easy to beat and you can just go in swinging. The most difficult encounters will be when more than one enemy are together, since the stances forces you to lock onto one enemy and it's almost impossible not to get hit by another enemy because of the attack length, animations, and just movement speed. You do get better weapons that do improve these issues a bit, but it still has the same issue until you get a gun. It lets you attack enemies from a distance, but you don't want to use it on every encounter since you need to find bullets. Using the gun is not a huge focus of the game, but finding the ammo is. Exploring is one of this game's biggest strengths. You'll be going around trying to open every door you can find. There are a lot of locked doors in this game, but I can't blame them with this neighborhood. This town could be a bit confusing to travel, especially with this constant fog, but you do get a handy dandy map. The map is your best friend, as it will let you know places you have already tried to visit and sometimes where you have to go. It even has its own dedicated button because they know you're going to use it a lot. Even with all this, you might still get lost since the game will want you to do things in certain orders or objects that are in weird spots. Who put a light bulb inside of a can? I will not blame you for using walkthroughs in this game because I did, as some of the puzzles could be confusing. It gives me a lot of vibes from those old point and click adventure games. You run around trying to solve these obscure puzzles like having to use canned juice to dislodge the garbage stuck in a garbage chute, or using melted wax as glue that is strong enough to lift a metal trap door. There are also more involved puzzles that have riddles in them. These are very interesting, but you can't get stuck trying to solve them. What is cool though is that the game has a separate difficulty between action and puzzles. It would have been a better experience for me if I decided to raise the action difficulty and lower the puzzles so that I could enjoy the best part of the game, the horror. This game will send chills down your spine. Almost everything about this game is meant to enhance its horror. One thing you might have noticed is that the game has no on-screen elements. This helped in immersing you in this game without having a constant health or ammo bar on screen distracting you. If you do want to check your health, you need to go into the pause menu and see how red the little screen is, or you can tell by how much your controller is shaking, which just adds pressure to the situation, especially when you have low health. Even the objects that you're supposed to pick up don't stand out too much compared to how other games let you know about them. If you thought nothing on the screen would immerse you, there is some very effective ambient background music from time to time, but other times, there is no music at all. All you hear is the sounds of James' footsteps just to give you that feel that you're alone in this place. Slowly walking around these cramped hallways with a flashlight that only lights up a few feet ahead of you, waiting for the radio to make this ear-scratching noise to alert you of nearby enemies. It feels like everywhere I go, the game has this perfect opportunity of having someone show up to scare me, but it rarely does. It's interesting that I was the least scared when I could see most of the enemies. My anticipation of not knowing what was there was worse than when I actually got to the enemy, since I always imagined something worse. I slowly crawled my way towards the radio with making the most noise because I wanted to be prepared for the worst with these clunky controls. The awkward controls are meant to add to the horror, but the difficulty of them did not add much since the enemy patterns were easy to deal with. While the enemies were rather creepy looking, moved really weird, or did unspeakable things, there's not a lot of shock or gross horror, although the game does dabble with it. Speaking of enemies, the game also does have some bosses, and most of them are pretty easy. I tend to hoard my items until I really need them, and by the time I get to the boss, I'm a walking armory. Since the game has tank controls with these odd camera angles, they could not make technically difficult fights. So it ends up being an endurance match to ring around the rosy until you have enough space to do the shooting animation without getting hit. The last fight is more difficult than all the other ones, and it does require a bit more moving around, but not by much. I don't want to spoil much of the game's ending, as it does have an interesting twist, and that's a big part of playing this game. The character's themes seem to deal with grief, guilt, and coping with these emotions. A few of the characters in this game go through their own trauma and seem to be drawn by this town just like James. You know this game is based on America since they all decided to come to a monster-infested ghost town instead of facing a therapist's medical bill. There's a lot of symbolism in this game, and trying to understand everything could be a good reason to replay this game. Once you beat the game, you have a stat screen and you can see that there are actually 4 endings in this game. In order to get the other 3 endings, you need to play the game in a specific way, like not healing very often, which is cool that the game's ending changed based on how you play. But it's a bit of a pain if you want to see the other endings. I would recommend watching the other endings on YouTube, but if you do decide to replay them, they do give you this cool chainsaw to mow down enemies on U-Game Plus. If you want something new, there is a sub-scenario. This sub-scenario you play as Maria. She is the character you interact with in the game, and this is a short story that will take you around an hour to complete. It plays similar to the main game and it gives you a bit more information about Maria, but it does play differently because you don't have the radio. Without the radio, you don't get warned of nearby enemies. I relied so much on the radio that I ran into an enemy by mistake and became way more cautious after that. I have to say, this is an amazing horror game. It puts a lot of focus on the puzzles and horror experience. Puzzles can be a brain teaser, and it's cool that the game lets you pick different difficulties for action and puzzles depending on your preferred playstyle. A lot of things are streamlined or hidden away to emphasize the atmosphere and the story of the game. Most of the game's flaws come from the combat. Even with its intentional nature of hiding the horror, with its clunky controls, it's not very interesting or fun with how simple encounters become to win. If you want some chills down your spine while stealing your resolve over every door opening, this is the game to play. However, there is another horror game we have to look into. Resident Evil 4 starts with our hero Leon from Resident Evil 2 talking about the downfall of the Umbrella Corporation. The only way any big corporation gets taken down, stock prices crashing. We now have Leon on a solo mission in Spain looking for the president's daughter who was kidnapped. Once he gets there, he notices that the villagers are acting strange and hostile to him. He is now investigating what's going on with these non-zombie villagers while searching for the president's daughter. Once you have control, you notice that this game has tank controls, just like Silent Hill 2. But it does have one major change: the location of the camera. The camera is now permanently behind Leon over the shoulder. This makes it so that when you press forward, it's forward for both Leon and your perspective as the player. It's a lot more intuitive than traditional tank controls, but the same can't be said about the shooting. When you pull out the gun, Leon cannot move and can only aim around. Every weapon has a red dot laser that you use to aim. You will notice that while you're aiming, the speed is rather slow. Not only that, but seeing the red dot sight from far away is gonna strain your eyes. But worst of all the guns have some sway to them, which is more noticeable the further they are from you. This encourages you to have the enemies as close as possible to get the perfect shot, since where you aim does make a difference. Shooting an enemy in the head will do more damage, but shooting them there or their leg will cause them to do a specific animation for you to get an extra hit in. A shot to the head will have you doing a roundhouse kick that will hit them and everyone around them, and shooting them on the leg will have you doing a goddamn suplex. Wrestling moves just look cool to me, especially when it causes their head to explode. It's a good thing to learn and get better at aiming because the enemies do evolve and become more difficult and smarter. One has a helmet where you have to shoot somewhere else besides the head, or a shield that protects most of their body. The game challenges you by having you change tactics based on the enemies that appear, as they'll have different strategies needed to defeat them. Although some enemies do feel like they're a bit too smart, like bringing crossbow, armor, or even a rocket launcher. I think it should be considered cheating to give them rocket launcher. With this variety of enemies, you will get a variety of weapons to use to help you in all these situations. This is great help, but it does bring up one complaint I have with this game. If you want to switch between weapons, you have to go into the menu, and it destroys the pacing of the game. You're going into the menu to say switch to one weapon, shoot a couple of times, and then go back into the menu and switch back to another weapon again, and you want to do this because you want to maximize your ammo. Why do you want to maximize your ammo? Because this is a survival horror game. The survival art in this game comes from the limited inventory and resources that you have. You'll be checking every nook and cranny for any items you can find. Oh boy, one whole egg in this stove. I wonder what they were cooking. While you grab as many items as you can find, you need to keep in mind that you have a limit on what you can carry. Everything you carry has to be able to fit in your suitcase, including health items, ammos, and even your guns. You want to have every gun you find in your inventory, but is it worth it? Should you pick up the powerful Magnum and trade up that space you can use for healing items or even other weapons and ammo? Even the famous herbs have this issue that every Resident Evil game implements. You can be patient and combine 3 different herbs to be able to increase your health, or use up mid combination to survive your next encounter. This can cause you to leave behind an item, and boy does it suck when you have to do that. The gaming horror in me is screaming. There are only 3 types of items that are now stored in the suitcase. Money, key items because that would just be me, and the treasure. Treasure only has one purpose, and that is to
I'll buy it at a high price.
This lovable merchant is scattered throughout the game where you can buy and sell items. One of the main things you'll be buying from him is weapons and the attachments to them. That will make things easier for you, but you have to keep in mind that you can't carry everything because of the size of the suitcase. It would be amazing to have that one-time use bazooka just in case, but is it worth it for the space? There's also certain things that he does not sell, specifically ammo and healing items. You do get a first aid spray once in a blue for sale, but those 2 items are very precious resources that you can't just buy more, so every heal and shot counts. Of course, they gave you a bigger suitcase to manage the resources, but the more interesting way they let you do this is by upgrading the weapons. You have 4 different stats to upgrade: power, ammo capacity, reload speed, and rate of fire. They all have their benefits, such as power letting you less ammo and being able to kill enemies faster, while ammo capacity is the underappreciated upgrade. Not only does it let you shoot more rounds before reloading, but at the same time allows you to hoard more ammo in general, since you're storing it in the clip of the gun instead of the suitcase. While this might seem like over optimization, you will be doing this because of this game's tension. The game is more tense than scary. There's a lot of gross and shock factor in the game, but you do become used to these situations. You're going to face dozens of these enemies, and while seeing the Plagas villager the first time is spooky, they just become another enemy, especially when you could throw a grenade at them. Most things stop being scary when you could throw a grenade at it. Heck, one of the main villains in this game is Timu Napoleon. While he does look gross, I think the scariest thing about him is that he's only 20 years old. What is his skin routine? Pro aging cream? Leon does not help with making this game more spooky. He has a very snarky attitude throughout the whole game, throwing jokes and one-liners, giving the game a B-movie feel.
No way, Leon.
Way?
You can't even enjoy all the cutscenes because this game has built-in QuickTime events into some of them, so you can never put down the controller. While this does add tension to the game, it does become rather annoying when you die and now you have to redo the whole QuickTime event. If anything, the game's horror comes from the combat. You're put in a situation where enemies are gonna swarm you in all directions but very slowly, like zombies but with medieval weapons. Standing still is your worst enemy, but you have to stand still to be able to use your weapon. Focusing on one enemy for too long is gonna cause the other ones to come up behind you. So you're always trying to run around to evade your enemies and stopping to quickly kill them. With how much is going on, you're going to miss some shots. And that just adds to the tension because you don't have a lot of those. If it's not enough, you also have Ashley as well. In my mind, she's probably the scariest thing in this game. Why? The story of this game is rescuing her and bringing her back to the United States. The game is an escort mission. So now you have to deal with all the combat situations while babysitting Ashley, who will not only get kidnapped but die if you shoot her by mistake. Getting a game over because she was in the wrong spot sucks. They do have ways to help you out, like having her wait in specific spots if you know trouble will be happening ahead. Some sections also give you a way to hide her without any worries by putting her inside a dumpster, where escort missions belong. Luckily, she gets kidnapped more than Princess Peach, so you don't actually have to worry about her for most of the game, especially in boss fights. Most of the boss fights require you to run around and shoot them. They're all unique in their gimmick and sadly feel like bullet sponges, because they seem to have small weak points. So hitting anything else feels like a waste of bullet, and you don't see a health bar on the enemies, which makes you wonder if you're doing damage at all. If you're smart, you'll use the one-time rocket launcher since that thing does a fuck ton of damage, and you don't have to waste too much time or resources on them. Once you rocket launch the last enemy, you beat the game, but there's a lot more to do. You can replay the game with new outfits and a new weapon is available for purchase. But before that, I recommend doing the sub scenario. The Separate Ways scenario has you playing as Ada Wong. Here you play parallel to Leon's story where you get answers to some events that happened in the original story. It's lengthy for a side scenario, but it mostly plays like a speed up version of the original game as you play a lot of the same levels. When you play as Leon, you get these memo hints of a mysterious figure the villains are having issues with, and it's alluding to Ada Wong. I think it's pretty cool you get to play the other story happening in the game. On another note, I have to say it's pretty stupid of the enemies to leave behind memos of their strategy and what they're doing when they have two active intruders. One of the main differences between their playthrough is that you get to use an explosive crossbow as a weapon with Ada. There's also a grappling hook she uses, but it's mostly used to skip around the map. If you want to play a shorter scenario, you can play as Simon Ada. Here you replay another section of Leon's story as Ada, and it'll take you around an hour to finish, with a very frustrating final fight. Just like the original story, completing them will allow you to purchase a unique weapon in the New Game Plus of Leon's story and the Separate Ways scenario. However, if you want something that's different, you can play the Mercenary mode. Mercenary mode is addictive. It's a minigame where you play as Leon with a pre-built loadout on 4 different maps. The goal of the game is to survive before the timer runs out while trying to get the highest score possible. Killing multiple enemies and keeping a streak will give you more points. However, you do have time extenders located around the map so you can stay longer in the fight, but the longer you stay, the more likely you are to die and a stronger enemy will show up. It's just the combat of the game put into a game mode and I love it. It does make the issue of having to go into the menu to switch weapons more forefront since you'll be switching between weapons a lot. The reason you want to extend the timer is to get a high score, and if your score is high enough, you will unlock a new character. Each character has their own unique loadout and even interesting playstyles to try out. It's definitely a fun mode when you want a quick kick of Resident Evil, and I only wish there was a way to play without the time limit and just fighting waves. I've never been a fan of time limits. I had a blast playing this game. The game does not have much horror besides its gore, and it's not helped with its cheesy B-movie one-liners and interaction, but it does make for it for its tense situations that will cause you to panic. Having you stand still to be able to shoot enemies forces you to risk letting enemies get too close, to having a limited amount of storage with multiple decisions of using, combining, or leaving behind items are all viable options. Every part of this game is used to enhance the survival aspect of the game, no matter how small it is. These two games are horror, but they use them in very different ways. Resident Evil tries to scare the player with shock and intensity. There's a lot of slimy and disgusting enemies in the game, and it's something I got used to after a while. The horror of the game comes from the gameplay itself. Enemies swarming over you while you try to defend yourself with limited movement, needing quick reactions, and limited resources gonna have you stressing from any mistakes you make. While on the other hand, Silent Hill 2 scares you with psychological horror. The game does have freaky looking creatures, but the atmosphere of the game is what's going to get to you. Every location is dark and weary where you have no idea what to expect. Will turning the corner or opening this door finally show me some monstrous creature on the other side? And let your imagination be your own undoing by presenting you with many situations where anything can happen, and sometimes it does and other times it doesn't. Resident Evil 4 overstimulates you by showing you and putting you in these high stressful situations, while Silent Hill 2 understimulates you by having you question something should be happening, expecting more, and letting your imagination put you in that stressful situation. I think Silent Hill 2 has the best horror experience because no one but you can make the scariest situation for yourself. Not only is the horror very different, but how the game uses tank controls, or more precisely, the location of the camera. In Resident Evil 4, you have the camera right behind the player, which makes tank controls much more manageable. It did make them have the character plant their feet for every shot, however, they used this to their advantage by making fights much more intense. While Silent Hill 2 is much more comparable to how most games with tank controls are done. While you do have the control of the camera in certain sections, you're fighting in it most of the time. They do have these really cool shots in the games that do help you focus on certain actions and enhance the atmosphere. In the end, it is clunky and obnoxious having to orate yourself when it decides to have these fixed camera angles. This could be because of the time these two games were released. Silent Hill 2 was released within the early years of the PS2, while Resident Evil 4 was released towards the end. In the end, Silent Hill 2 leans much more into the horror and storytelling side than Resident Evil 4. However, I believe that Resident Evil 4 is a better game. Resident Evil 4 as a whole is a better package in the gameplay department. It's not as deep as Silent Hill 2, but it does hold up and has its own charm with its fun story. Gameplay wise, Resident Evil has a lot of more depth in its survival and shooting. Not only that, but Silent Hill 2 is a psychological horror game with a lot of symbolism that is harder to recommend to a general audience compared to Resident Evil 4 more fast paced and easier to follow storyline. If you're only able to play one, I would say play Resident Evil 4. However, we don't live in such a world. So if you're looking to be scared, I highly recommend playing Silent Hill 2. Which of these two games do you think is better? If you prefer something more lighthearted, I have a series on Ratchet & Clank vs Jak and Daxter for the PS2 that you can watch now, but as always my lovely patients, I thank you so much for watching and tune in next time. Bye.